For more on the great debate about minimum wage, I spoke with Edward Conard. He's the former managing director at Bain Capital and a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and author of a book called Unintended Consequences, Why Everything That You've Been Told About the Economy is Wrong. I asked him, though, about the U.S. minimum wage and how it compares to other countries.
Well, when we look at the growth of the United States back to 1980, for example, we've grown over or back to 1990, excuse me, we've grown over 60%. Europe and Japan, the other high-wage economies, have grown half as much. If you go back to 1980, we've added about 40 million jobs. Europe and Japan have added less than half as much. And so even though you see the median wage relatively flat in the United States, what is overlooked is that we have added an enormous number of workers into our workforce relative to Europe and Japan, and we've been able to maintain wages that are 25% higher on average, or the median wages are 25% higher than they are in Europe. We have significantly more hours of work per working age adult than they have. So we've been able to generate a much larger absolute increase in middle class incomes than they have.
Each state has the right to set their own minimum wage as well. Some are higher than the national average and some are lower. Do you agree or do you believe that we should have a higher minimum wage?
Well, I think when you think a little more carefully about what raising the minimum wage will do, I think you start to scratch your head and wonder about the benefits. So the first is, there's a lot of studies that show that as we increase the minimum wage, we get workers pulled into the workforce who tend to be students, who are richer on average than the population, working mothers who tend to be richer on average than the population, and they end up displacing poor workers in those jobs, and we actually don't do as much benefit for the poorer workers as we might hope. The second is that when we raise the price of hamburgers, for example, to pay for the minimum wage, that's a tax on the consumers of people that eat hamburgers. Well, who are those people? Those tend to be young people. Those tend to be people, young families with young children. They tend to be poor workers. So we end up taxing the very people, I think, that we're trying to help.
I think we can all agree that there is a problem of some sorts. What is going to be a reasonable solution that everybody can agree on? What is the right number, if you will?
Well, I think what will end up happening here is that people haven't thought very deeply about what the implications of this are for the poor. And so I think they think that this is helpful to the poor and it doesn't hurt them much, that largely taxes other people. So I think there has historically been a lot of popularity for raising the minimum wage, despite the fact that the economic consequences for helping the poor are not as good as they appear to be.
In your book, you talk about the unintended consequences about the economy in general. What's the number one misnomer that people have when it comes to thinking about the economy and then thinking about the greater good for society?
Well, the number one would be that the U.S. is really an investment-oriented economy, and we've poured a lot of money into innovation and have outpaced the rest of the world in terms of producing innovation, and that has produced more prosperity in the United States and more growth in our workforce than other high-wage economies like Europe and Japan.
Education, how big of a part is that?
I think education is important, but I think we put a lot of money into education before the rest of the world. We've educated a very large percentage of our population. I think the easy gains from education have come and gone. And I think from here on forward, it's going to be very difficult to squeeze a lot more value out of increasing the amount of education that we give to our workforce. I would say this, though, that we have a lot of talented workers who have not chosen to get the training that produces innovation, and we have not persuaded them to take the entrepreneurial risks which are needed to produce innovation, and that's where an awful lot of the value and growth that's driving the U.S. economy has come from, and we have a lot of opportunity there if we can really harness it and put it to work.
Ed Conard, former managing director at Bain Capital and visiting scholar